Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked. And if you're new to us, remember to hit subscribe or follow on whichever pod platform you're listening to us on so we land in your feeds automatically to listen to myself, Rob Harris from Sky News, Martyn Ziegler from The Times, and maybe occasionally from FIFA HQ in Zurich, Tariq Panja from the New York Times. This is a rarity. You've made it onto FIFA turf.
First time in 7 years, guys. I'm just in front of me, out through the window. Didier Deschamps, the France manager, is on the phone pacing after the European draw for the 2026 World Cup. And the murmur you might hear behind me, we're in the press room here, people are still filing after that draw.
The press room, though not in the main building itself there. You've not got quite as far as going through the main doors.
No, still away from there. The press room here is an annex. I think you guys remember it's where the FIFA gym is, and that was one thing you notice here. God, everyone seems to be in very good shape. I suppose with all the nutritionists and the fitness and Arsene Wenger on the scene, it's I think ketchup might be banned here as well.
So, you were in Zurich, I think, since the big day, which was Wednesday, a couple of days ago, from when we were recording this, and the big vote in inverted commas, on the 2030 and 2034 World Cup hosts.
Yeah, and guys, we were all here, all three of us were here in 2010, in December, when they had a vote in Zurich, the last time, a big vote in Zurich for Men's World Cup, which was the 2018 and 2022 World Cup. And it couldn't be any more different to then. There were hundreds of people here then, and it ended with, obviously, Russia and Qatar being announced the World Cup and quite a insane press conference with the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin. This was very different. It's about 12 of us at the back of this restaurant.
Yeah, with no ability to actually get into the FIFA lobby where they'd built a TV studio. But also, it wasn't just us kept out this time. All the member associations had to dial in on Zoom. You could say it was environmentally sustainable, but we do see FIFA going around the world to hold meetings pretty often.
Yeah, and I suppose, we shouldn't talk about the environment here without mentioning that the FIFA president's private jet flying all over the world all of the time. So I think in this case, there are reasons, we'll get into those later, why this was held on Zoom, why it was so low key, why the media still haven't been able to really ask any questions of the leaders who've decided this. So yeah, it was behind Zoom. And what we're talking about, we're talking about the World Cup, which is the biggest sporting event on the planet in terms of the number of people who see. You'd think you'd want people to talk about it, make it an occasion like in the past.
The IOC are on the phone for you. Ask them why the Olympics isn't considered the biggest.
In terms of numbers, sorry to the IOC, in terms of viewing figures, the World Cup is a bigger event. And you could talk about other metrics in terms of large events, maybe for a pod another day, but nothing is more watched over a month period than the FIFA Men's World Cup.
Yeah, I'm sure that is the case. It's a strange one also, because not only were the media not allowed to ask any questions, but the fact it was all online via Zoom is actually none of the associations were able to ask any direct questions. They had to sort of submit them in writing. So, I mean, I suppose you could say that because there was only one bid for each World Cup, the outcome was known. This was just a matter of going through the process, and perhaps shouldn't have spent a fortune on putting people up in hotels just to come and have them press the button in the same way. So it probably did save some money, but it also meant that it's a very controversial World Cup in 2034 in Saudi Arabia, and for other reasons, there are lots of questions to be asked about 2030. That it avoided any difficult questions almost.
But Saudi officials have taken more questions than Gianni Infantino on this bidding process and the bid in the last year, because they've taken quite a few, whereas FIFA haven't taken any on camera or in a press conference.
Yeah, that's right. Gianni Infantino hasn't talked to people at length or at all about this since October 2023, when suddenly announced that 2034, the World Cup that's gone to Saudi Arabia, would suddenly be bundled together. There are so many questions. And, if you're going to take this leadership role and, announce your big tournament going to these places, you should try and own it. There are probably some justifications he may think about to say this, one being the financial ones and others, but it'd be nice for them to explain it. We're often criticized for not offering enough balance on these things, but one of the ways you can achieve that is getting the principals involved and explaining these decisions. And it's been a year, hasn't it?
The auditors of the bidding process did produce a video for that virtual FIFA Congress to say they did verify the whole process, insist it had been done all fairly and properly. And of course, on the face of it, potentially you could say it was, because other bidders did have a chance to enter for 2034, certainly. But a lot of the focus on 2034 on the process has shifted the focus away from 2030. That incredible sprawling World Cup that's now going to take place. 6 countries on 3 continents, starting in South America, in Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay for the centenary celebrations, then shifting to Spain, Morocco and Portugal for the other 101 matches. Now, those bids were just put together by the FIFA Council, weren't they? Didn't even go to the Congress to suddenly decide, do we want to have a 3-continent World Cup for the first time? Maybe 3 other continents might have tried to bid.
Yeah, this is all basically a FIFA Council decision, basically being directed by what Gianni Infantino wanted. So, I mean, FIFA always say, oh, it was a FIFA Council decision, it's not just him, but let's face
Unanimous,
it.
they say.
Unanimous, exactly. But I think you have a situation now, he says what he wants and the Council just agrees. It's been a long time since anyone's actually confronted him, perhaps not since the 2018, was it, in Colombia, when the SoftBank Club World Cup plan was first raised and the UEFA members were sort of basically blocked it. I don't think since then there's been anything.
Apart from the biennial World Cup plan being opposed by UEFA and then helping to kill that one off.
Yeah, that's right. There was the biennial World Cup. But in terms of this, I think we have to go back. What I understand is there was the FIFA Congress in Kigali last year, and at that point there was the 2034 bid race. There was a South American bid, if you remember, with I think 4 or 5 countries that were going to be part of that, as opposed to this Spain, Morocco, Portugal one, and then there was talk about the home nations in the United Kingdom, and then I think there was a degree of horse trading that took place there. And interestingly, the Asians said, okay, we will back the Europeans if you then allow us to have the World Cup in 2034. And the South Americans, obviously, Alejandro Dominguez, the president of CONMEBOL, is from Paraguay. They managed to get 3 games, and somehow Paraguay is one of those countries that will host the 3 South American games in what will be quite a strange World Cup in 2030.
The big question is, why then does no one really dissent? Obviously, we had that letter from Lise Klaveness, the Norwegian Federation president, although she couldn't read it herself at the Congress. It had to be read out by the FIFA Secretary General Matthias Grafson. So why are people so reticent to speak out? Or it's not for us to tell them what to do. Is it the fact they have tournaments they want to bid for themselves, and if you do criticise the leadership or the process, then that would count against you?
Yeah, I spoke to Lars Christer Olsen, the long-time UEFA General Secretary, former head of the European Leagues, very experienced guy in football administration. And he said basically it's a bargaining carousel. So people want things for their own house, and so they go along with what's been suggested and proposed, especially if there's only one offer, one bid, because they want to get something for themselves in the future. And it might be something quite small, it might be a under-17s tournament, might be a congress or something like that. But for all these things, they're looking to get the most for themselves.
Those are really good points, because it's not just FIFA, it's UEFA and the other ones. They've got things to hand out, but for the majority of these nations, it's not a case of getting events. Most of the FA's federations in FIFA, just 200, most of them are really small. Most of it's about money. Most of the income, for some of them, all of the income that they have in their coffers is handed out from FIFA. That gives an immense amount of power to the FIFA president and the regional governing body presidents over the electorate. And you saw on that Zoom vote, half of them were not paying attention. There was one chap in his car, and there were at least 3 empty seats at the time of the, inverted commas, vote for the 2030 and 34 World Cups. Like, it's all been done. How many of these people take any of this seriously or feel they have a stake is up for debate.
Who knows? Maybe they intentionally didn't want to be seen to take part in the acclamation.
I think there might have been a factor, definitely. There was quite, I thought, a sort of unintentionally hilarious thing in that the Norway decided they sort of said that they didn't believe it should be done by acclamation. So they wanted that they didn't agree with the process, and they didn't agree with that. So the Swiss FA put forward a proposal that it should be done via acclamation, and that there should be a vote on whether it should be done by acclamation by people clapping. So should we vote on the World Cup host by clapping? Clap if you agree. So basically we had 2 rounds of clapping, and that was it. And then everyone was very, very happy.
Acclamation, acclamation, acclamation. But just for the scene, Rob, what did it look like? It looked, from Gianni Infantino, you mentioned, he was in the lobby in what, like a TV studio behind a bank of screens. What did that look like as it was broadcast?
It was a vast empty desk, and then there was a podium where Gianni Infantino looked pretty lonely. There was no one else from FIFA around him apart from the general secretary, and it didn't really capture the moment that normally you see with the World Cup hosting. It did mean the focus perhaps was more then eventually on the winners. So in Saudi Arabia, there was fireworks and drone shows, and they very much made it about their domestic celebrations with the Saudi officials speaking, and you did see some celebrations on the streets. And because we sort of think about that, and some might think this is criticism of Saudi Arabia, it's not. I mean, they've actually played the game masterfully, you could say, strategically managing to cozy up to Gianni Infantino, pandering to his exact desires in terms of being seen around the rich and powerful, and really showing that by providing funding and flattery, they've managed to avoid a protracted process of the type Qatar had to go through for the 2022 World Cup.
That's right. I mean, in terms of this, and just to be clear, Saudi Arabia have just as much right as anybody else to bid for the World Cup. It's something they want, something a bunch of other countries want, and they bent the process to their will. The questions are probably more pertinent for FIFA and its governance model. How comes it was allowed to be bent towards Saudi's will so comfortably, so serenely? And people in Saudi Arabia are football fans. They're probably very excited about these things. But the questions, Lisa Klaveness said, the transparency wasn't there. There are huge questions about it. It kind of just happens. And in terms of the 2030 World Cup, so 2 World Cups were offered. Should we talk about those a little bit? What are the positives of this 2030 World Cup? There are environmental concerns, obviously, and major concerns around that one too. But why are we going there? Are there any positives there?
Well, I think the positives in that a big chunk of it is going to be in the African continent for only the second time in Morocco. I think that's a positive. And I think, in terms of a World Cup in Spain, Portugal, that one of the heartlands of football, I think that will be quite good. And marking the centenary is quite nice, even if it is going to be very, very costly in many ways. So I think it's a sort of strange, complicated World Cup. I'm not saying. I think it could be quite a good one, and for sort of very different reasons in different parts of those hosting countries.
And if you consider how few times South America has held the World Cup, really, when we talk about Europe or often Britain deserving it, it's not. It's the South Americans who've lost out more often than not. They had it in Argentina in 1978, then had to wait until Brazil 2014 to holding it again. And now they do have matches and another World Cup, but only 3, so they very much are the most junior of partners.
Yeah, I'd argue they haven't really got the World Cup here, have they? They've got that moment to celebrate the centenary. The first World Cup was played in Uruguay, and we're going to remark on that and celebrate it. But as you said, such a football crazy continent. It's passionate, supported, very educated footballing population. They're getting just 3 matches as opposed to perhaps a tournament in the future. It seems to be a very cheap bargain struck by the CONMEBOL president, Alejandro Dominguez.
And Portugal hosting World Cup matches for the first time as well.
Yeah, they had the Euros 2004, which they did themselves. But yeah, this will be a first for them.
Well, the sense in Portugal is, and I don't know what you guys think, they're very much the junior partner in that tripartite group with Morocco and Spain. They may only get 15 matches, and there's about 104 World Cup games. It's going to be in Portugal, but is it really?
Yeah, most of the stadiums been put forward are in Spain. I think 4 from Morocco and 3 from Portugal. The Morocco is an interesting because the Hassan II stadium, which is planned for Casablanca, would be the biggest football stadium in the world, 115,000 seats. So I think there's going to be a bit of a wrestling match between Morocco and Spain about who hosts the final.
You perhaps say that Morocco might be more deserving given the fact there's only ever been one World Cup final held in Africa. There are rights issues with Morocco. They were flagged in the inspection report for their sole bid for the 2026 World Cup. That very detailed inspection report from FIFA, which raised sort of the red risk, high risk issues.
Yeah, and that's weirdly bundling these two tournaments together. All of the focus has been on Saudi Arabia. We talked about the rights issues with Morocco. Don't forget, Morocco is a serial bidder for the tournament and serial loser until this moment. It bid for the 2026 World Cup, which was won by the US, Mexico, and Canada in that combined bid. And those issues over the human rights haven't gone away, and they really haven't been addressed in this edition of bidding, even by the media, because of, to say, all that focus on Saudi Arabia.
And on Saudi Arabia, the English FA put it in their statement endorsing the bid, echoing the language from the kingdom that a World Cup can be a catalyst for positive change. So can it change Saudi Arabia? Certainly some of the language from the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is they are reforming, they are providing women with more rights as the country talks up changes to the labour laws as well, although clearly rights groups are concerned that those reforms haven't gone far enough.
I think it's these claims by the English FA. I think Gianni Infantino said the same thing about it can promote social change and human rights improvements. I mean, if you look back at the recent history of major sports events going to authoritarian regimes, there isn't, I wouldn't say, much to go on. So, for example, Beijing Olympics, the Chinese actually talked about this was their, they're going to be opening up to democracy when they bid in 2001. You could actually argue the reverse has happened. So Russia won Sochi won the Olympics in 2008. About a month later, Russia invaded Georgia. After the Sochi Games in 2014, they invaded Crimea. After the World Cup in 2018, a couple of years after that, they invaded Ukraine and become very repressive. And I think even with Qatar, even in October, has rode back on it. They've had one election for its advisory council. Now, is it all going to go back to being appointed directly by the emir?
There's nothing new for FIFA and the World Cup in terms of the choice of destination for the tournament. 1934, held in fascist Italy under Mussolini.
Yeah, well, look, but the world, you hope, has moved on in terms of rights since 1934. So, all of these sports organizations, they're able to talk a really good game. But when it comes, we've seen, it's quite a cynical world, isn't it? And this is a huge check that Saudi Arabia is able to make and a huge contribution to football. So one thing that I've found very striking, compared to when Qatar was awarded the hosting rights in 2010, hand-wringing from the football industry is almost non-existent. We've been talking about all these rights groups, leagues, clubs, all of these organizations. And I was thinking why. One of the clues might be in the decade that since Qatar was awarded hosting rights, it's paved the football landscape in gold, hasn't it? TV rights from Qatar, being media group, have been falling into leagues across Europe, sponsorship deals, etc. And now Saudi Arabia have got 10 years to build a World Cup. And I bet there's some people, whether they're federations, leagues, clubs, even some of these players, thinking, hang on, there could be a lot of money coming my way. Call me cynical, but we've seen this playbook before, haven't we?
The money, you're right, Tariq. That is what it's all about for FIFA. So FIFA want to earn more money. They want to increase its revenues. Gianni Infantino has promised, I think, when he took over, that he was going to multiply the amount of money each association receives, which is it's a sort of classic patronage power game. And what better way than to give Saudi Arabia the biggest prize of all? And we saw exactly, within a few months of the announcement that they were the sole bidder at the end of last year, Aramco, the state-owned giant, did the biggest ever sponsorship deal FIFA's ever had and had a special category of its own. So, yes, it makes sense for FIFA. We want more money and we're going to spread it around the world, so that's their justification. But at what cost? I mean, as with the final, taking the game globally, the final was going to be 350 miles away from the last time Asia held a final in Doha.
And 10 years ago, we might not have even been contemplating a World Cup in Saudi Arabia. If we're thinking about another World Cup in Asia, we'd be focusing on China, which had decided to focus so much on using football for its growth and global soft power. And I suppose it shows how things can quickly change, with perhaps Saudi Arabia's course shifting based on Mohammed bin Salman being appointed Crown Prince in 2017. So how much is dependent on MBS, as he's known, being Crown Prince, maybe one day rising to king? And could things swiftly change with a power shift in Saudi Arabia?
Massively dependent on Mohammed bin Salman and his whims. This is a monarchy, an autocratic state. He's the de facto leader. So someone asked me the other day, how long do you think this will go on for? How long does sport going to deal with Saudi Arabia? It's Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Salman that calls the shots. It's as long as he wants to do this. He's been able to get, so far, absolutely anything he wants when it comes to the sports world. And you're right, Rob. If he suddenly decides tomorrow he doesn't want to do it, he can rule by fiat. What are FIFA going to do? Yeah, we were talking about China being the coming force, 2016, 17, 18, and they've changed course. China's not in the conversation for anything. In fact, half their leadership has now been, football leadership has been arrested and convicted of corruption. Just this week, Lee Tier, the national team coach, former Everton player, he's been sentenced to 20 years in jail for bribery. And that's a function of the change of course as well. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's up to one guy at the end of the day.
Well, there's another guy to mention here, Yasser Al-Rumayyan. He's, of course, the chairman of Newcastle United, also governor of the Public Investment Fund, newly appointed to the supreme authority that's going to be organising the World Cup, reporting directly to Mohammed bin Salman. Just a few weeks ago, he reflected on how initially 2% of the PIF investments were internationally. That then grew to 30%. Now the target is to bring it down to 18 to 20%, seen as a desire to shift the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund focus to domestic investment. Now, with the World Cup being there, it means there'll be a lot of spending domestically on infrastructure, from stadiums and beyond. So perhaps does that show the need to think inwardly to show the domestic population that this isn't just money that's being spent all around the world?
But that has been part of the story, hasn't it, of Saudi Arabia? Well, a lot of these events have been in Saudi Arabia, whether the boxing matches, bringing Cristiano Ronaldo there, all that spending of the leagues. Saudi Arabia's got a very young population. I think 69% of it is under 30. A lot of this is for that domestic consumption, and that's the balance. They're looking also at increasing foreign direct investment, which really hasn't happened since these reforms. He's tried a number of things, including trying to force companies to move their Middle East headquarters to Saudi Arabia if they want to do business with them. Maybe having the World Cup will bring some of these companies in and investing foreign capital into the Saudi economy.
We've seen that with one media outlet. One Football has got a new operation in the kingdom as well.
With small acorns, Rob, grow giant oaks. So where one football leads, perhaps others will follow. At least the Saudis will be hoping.
Well, one thing is for certain, many more countries for Gianni Infantino to be going to check in on World Cup preparations. Also, the Women's World Cup in Brazil in 2027. Interestingly, of course, that was only awarded this year, 3 years out from the tournament. Saudi's been awarded 10 years out. We don't know the host of the 2031 Women's World Cup yet. In between those Men's World Cups, and that's why there's so little dissent in world football, because there are many countries perhaps wanting to bid for the tournament. So generally, as we wrap up with the thoughts from FIFA, what's it been like being back in the HQ? How welcome did you feel, despite the inability to ask any leaders of FIFA anything on the record?
No, felt very welcome. I met people who I know. We've been covering this organisation for 20 years, particularly the press department. We know these people quite well. Nice to see people in the flesh again. And, being back in Zurich, when we've had some crazy adventures over the years. I had a brief chat with Martyn when I landed at Zurich Airport. The memories do come flooding in. Just one thing before we move on here. There's going to be, we had the European draw here as well, of course, just a few days later for the World Cup. And there is a fixture that is going to cause night sweats at UEFA and at FIFA. In England's group, I think, which is Group K, Albania have been drawn with Serbia. These two nations haven't met since 2015, when this incredible scene happened where a drone flew over the stadium in the match between these two teams to qualify for Euro 2016 with a map of Greater Kosovo. That just caused mayhem. The Serbian players trying to jump up and grab this flag, the game being abandoned, a man being hit with a chair on the pitch. This is a fixture that they really didn't want to happen. They've managed to keep other teams apart, but not these two. I think this is something that is one to watch.
Yeah, I remember that. That was crazy, wasn't it? That the drone thing, and it caused absolute uproar. So we'll be watching very closely to see what happens in these two matches.
Although not kept apart, unlike some nations, including Spain and Gibraltar even.
Yeah, and Belarus and Ukraine, a couple of political football matches they didn't want to take place, but here we go. And by the way, it's much easier now to qualify for this World Cup because there's 16 places available for UEFA after the World Cup was enlarged. So this will be the first enlarged World Cup to 48 teams.
And in this very week that UEFA announced punishments for the Serbian FA for racism by its fans at Nations League games. We saw an attempt to burn an Albania flag in Switzerland.
Yeah, I mean, this has gone back. This sort of, it's been sort of bubbling around in football for some time. You remember Granit Xhaka doing the eagle, that sign which I think we've mentioned before, and this whole Albanian-Serbian rivalry enmity has been actually, I think, a growing issue for the football authorities.
Yes, Romania and Kosovo abandoned a couple of weeks ago, remember? In injury time when the Romanian fans were chanting Serbia inside the stadium. That the repercussions of that, they're now at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Romanians are appealing, Kosovans are appealing. Yeah, it's a shame, but it's not going anywhere soon.
So Serbia have been banned from selling tickets to their next away matches, 2 away matches in UEFA competitions, and they've got to close parts of the stadium for 2 home games. And that is going to impact Nations League playoffs. The World Cup qualifiers count as a FIFA competition, don't they?
Yes.
I'm not willing to put you on the spot there as a quiz, even though it falls under UEFA in terms of the centralised sales.
Yeah, I was just trying to remember if that was correct or not, or exactly how it works. But yeah, no, you're right, Rob.
Yeah, very much in the season of end-of-year quizzes. A very niche type of end-of-year quiz.
Oh, you'll be struggling to get them through the doors if you're going to have that at your local pub.
So that's the world of FIFA. What else has been going on this week? Well, when we talk about spreading the World Cup to so many countries in football, the Olympics has another plan to put events far and wide. At the Paris Games this year, we had some of the events held thousands of miles away in Tahiti. Well, for the 2026 Winter Olympics that are meant to be in Milan Cortina, they're suggesting now that the bobsled, luge and skeleton could be in Lake Placid in the United States.
Or maybe they've been listening to you, Rob. You've been calling for the Olympics to be taking place all over the world, of various time zones. You talked about TV rights for places that love these sports. Do we know if bobsled, luge, and skeleton are huge, popular events in the Lake Placid area? Because if they are, Rob, you've been listened to.
Yeah, I think the thing I often say is about having a 24-hour TV event, Olympics or even Commonwealth Games. So there are events all spread out so you can watch at any time.
They're going to rename it Rob Sled in your honour.
But it's not the worst idea, because look, especially with the Winter Olympics.
My ideas or ideas generally?
Let's have a think about it for a second. It's not that bad because these sports are so niche. It's not like, hey, Ziggs, Rob, let's meet you Saturday for a bit of luge. Like, they have them at these Olympic events. These things are built at great cost and they're not really used that often. So if they exist, why not reuse them? And this is one of the problems the IOC has had, is attracting Winter Olympic host cities. Maybe sharing some of the costs might help them stage the event long term.
Well, we have seen the LA 2028. They're moving a lot of their stuff, as you say, thousands of miles away from LA. I mean, the cricket, for example, could easily be held in New York. The canoeing it could be down in the south of the USA. So it's very much about sort of cost benefit and not being tied to everything has to be in that one city. But is the issue around the bobsled in Milan Cortina that they're not going to be able to build one in time? Is that the issue?
That is the issue. So perhaps it is expediency and sensible in terms of, rather than trying to give unrealistic expectations of completing it or spending in a way that isn't needed to rush the project.
I hope they don't then build it, because that'd be ridiculous then. The whole point of the cost benefit and all that stuff we've been talking about is completely moot if they end up building all of these tracks after the Winter Olympics for nobody to use. So they may as well stop that construction if it's going to Lake Placid. But I guess we will see in time.
Something we don't talk about very often on the podcast is rugby league, and intriguingly, how it's been used for some geopolitical diplomacy, because a team from Papua New Guinea is going to enter Australia's National Rugby League from 2028. They've been given this license, and it was a deal done by the Australian and Papua New Guinean prime ministers, seen as part of a pact to try to encourage Papua New Guinea not to enter into any security or military ties with China.
Well, can I just say, before we move on, you said we don't cover rugby league enough. Can I just say hello, Freddie Ziegler, wishing you all the best in your rugby league career. Martyn, what do you think of this political deal that Rob has mentioned?
No, it's an amazing story. Rugby league is Papua New Guinea's national sport, so it's massive in Papua New Guinea. And Australia have seen this as a sort of geopolitical opportunity to to sort of stop China's influence in that part of the Pacific, and to get, I think it's going to pay them about 301 million pounds sterling, the Australian equivalent. And it's like a sports diplomacy. So, it really is the sort of the ultimate in terms of sports politics meeting each other.
But it is going to come at a cost. 380 million US dollars, 600 million Australian dollars over 10 years. That will be the price that Australian taxpayers will have to foot the bill for.
$60 million a year there. The cost is against what do they stand to lose, right? It's having been encircled with Chinese influence all around them. I think that would have been the calculation. Is 60 million too high a price for that?
Indeed, and players will gain tax incentives to relocate to Papua New Guinea. They're going to have a secure compound, and there will be various funding.
I'll tell you one thing, the Rugby Football League in England will be desperately hoping that they can get a similar deal to fend off Chinese influence, because they're really struggling financially too.
Perhaps the Chinese could invest in the Rugby Football League then.
And that's right. That would be the ultimate, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Well, we did see France have to withdraw from hosting the 2025 Rugby League World Cup. It will instead be played in Australia and Papua New Guinea in 2026.
Yeah, that just shows that the issues with the sort of global popularity of the sport. It's very much focused around a few countries, and financially it just wasn't seen as viable to do it in France.
Closer than I imagined. It's about 4 hours away from Australia to PNG.
Depends what part of Australia, because it's 5 hours from Perth to Sydney, isn't it? Some of those distances there are just insane. Remember during the Women's World Cup, but it'd be interesting one to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. Well, Tariq, great to have you speaking to us from FIFA HQ in Zurich.
How's the prices of restaurants, cafes, etc. in Zurich since you last went?
My goodness.
What's the most expensive coffee?
I was speaking to my friend Marcus Harm, who you guys know from ZDF, the German television channel. Just it's eye-watering prices. It's almost Premier League meeting level prices, guys.
No wonder they have to get the Saudis in to fund those FIFA coffees then.
It's spectacular.
Well, I think there's probably no reason to even discuss it, because there's not going to be alcohol in Saudi Arabia.
I don't know. Okay, that's actually a good... I actually think there might be, because, I don't know, 10 years is a long time away. This whole path towards liberalisation. And what Saudi are doing is actually a lot more than the Qataris were doing. The Qataris, I think, a little bit through gritted teeth, were agreeing to a lot of these things. And I think that their leadership is a lot more conservative than the Saudis. I actually think, Martyn, you'll be having a pint somewhere in Neom, 6,000 feet in the air, wherever that stadium in the sky is going to be, a tipple of your choice. Also, just to be honest, the Qatar World Cup didn't suffer really from a lack of beer. It's cultural there. If they don't want beer, they don't want beer. The issue there was they kept saying there would be, and we kept banging on about beer for God knows how long. And then Sheikh Jassim, the Emir's brother, decided, a day or two before the first match that, you know what? No. And that obviously infuriated Budweiser and all the rest of it. If it's going to be there, it's going to be there. If it's not going to be there, it's not going to be there. But this 10-year kind of dance about beer was just kind of ridiculous.
As ever, thank you everyone for listening. You can send us your thoughts sportunlockedpod@gmail.com. Where actually we started to receive emails from the Saudi FA this week. And you can message us at Sport Unlocked on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, X, TikTok as well. But for now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.